So, firstly, Henry, thank you very much for joining me. You, of course, you're best known as the chief football writer for the Times. Obviously, you were previously with the Daily Telegraph as well. But where does your passion for sports writing and football writing come from?
I would definitely differentiate between sports writing and football writing. I have no interest in covering other sports. I mean, I've done one or two, a little bit of sailing, a little bit of rugby, but it just doesn't, sailing doesn't float my boat, to use the analogy. It has to be football for me. I've been obsessed with it, probably like most people from a young age. I don't come from particularly football background. I don't think anyone in my family is particularly interested in it. But where I lived, my room overlooked in London, excuse me, overlooked a park. And when I saw the local kids there, I would head over there immediately. And I went to a school that was mainly academic, but it was quite well known for its football in terms of probably about 150 years ago when the game was being founded. So you were very aware of your surroundings at school, that your predecessors there had helped shape the game. So it's always been in me, really. So I've got the job now I've wanted from when I was like 14, 15, 16. It was just a question of getting there. Love my time at the Independent, love my time at the Telegraph, and particularly enjoying my time here at the Times.
Yeah. Now, I think I first came across you from this book here, 50 Years of Hurt, yes, which I read and thoroughly enjoyed. And what inspired you to write that? Of course, the story of England football is one that is sort of, it's been so much to so many people around this country. There's obviously the lack of success, perhaps, and which has encapsulated the football in this country for so many years. And so why was that a topic that you wanted to explore and write in that book?
I think we're quite a patriotic country, and then we're obviously a very football obsessed country. And the enjoyment that people get going to football matches is obviously built around clubs, but it's also, if you've travelled with England, if you've seen the England fans, there's some idiots there, but the passion for England, for the team, is immense. I mean, Newcastle United well. There's always been a connection between Newcastle United and England on the terraces as well as in the dressing room. So it's just that passion. I mean, I wrote the book because the Telegraph put me on gardening leave when I went to the Times. And I thought, well, I've got 4 months to kill and I haven't got a particularly big garden. So I've just wanted to write it. And I thought, well, I've got this, because you get to know people in the game. So I chased Alan Shearer around a golf course. In fact, at a Sir Bobby Robson Foundation fundraising day, he was playing golf and his agent said, well, yeah, if you can catch him on a golf course. So I got a buggy with Liz, who and we almost went into a lake. We almost got stuck in a bunker, but we caught up with Alan Shearer and talked to him about the art of penalty taking, which obviously he was so good at. So part of it was the sort of process of meeting the people who then I got, fortunately, to contribute to the book, as well as the sort of broader themes of English football. I mean, if you look back on it, there are actually a few things there that have looked very outdated in terms of the quality of players coming through. The academies now are fantastic. Dan Ashworth talked in the book about that. And I was a little bit skeptical, were all these good kids going to come out of the academy? The book was written in 2016. You look around now, I mean, you've got Elliot Anderson. I mean, the quality of players sort of breaking through at all clubs. And you hope they will get a good, decent run in the first teams, I think is encouraging. So that part of the book was wrong, but I just enjoyed doing it. 4 months to kill and got it done.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there is a World Cup this year. It's winter. It's going to be completely different and strange for everyone watching. Staying on that topic of England, obviously, the Euros last year, we got to the final. Heartbreak in the end. Nations League this season hasn't been brilliant, hasn't certainly gone to plan some of the games. How do you assess the chances for Gareth Southgate's men?
There seems to be two takes on Southgate and England at the moment. The broadcast press conferences, which are the ones that most people see or listen to, Southgate sort of talks and it's all quite positive. The sort of print stroke digital ones, the one I'm involved in, which is a separate one and doesn't get broadcast, they're quite feisty affairs, and they have been to an extent since the Croatia semi-final in 2018, and the fact that Southgate didn't react enough. but particularly since the game against Italy last summer at Wembley. Obviously, a lot of that was overshadowed because of the horrific racist abuse to the three black players, and also the incidents beforehand and all that. And Southgate got off a little bit lightly. So, we've had arguments, debates, questions with him ever since about why he didn't react when the game was turning against England, even though they're 1-0 up just before half time. Why didn't he react to Mancini's changes? So issues like that, stay in your mind. So I take your point about the Nations League, but this is slightly deeper and longer running than that. England have got a collection of players, fantastic collection. Excuse me, the depth of players is fantastic. But do England have the manager who has that killer instinct, who has that in-game management, who has that decisiveness to make the changes at the key time to ensure England protect a 1-0 lead, get another goal, or if they're behind, come back into it? So I really like Gareth. He's a far more resilient character than he's always given credit for. You must be when you've had 4,000 letters abusing you after missing a penalty at Euro 96. He's got to be tough. I do slightly worry that when it comes down to it, England might not make it, which will be so frustrating because this is a fabulously talented collection of players.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, certainly after the Euros, I thought they could go on to more greater things, but as you say, things haven't necessarily been perfect since. Now, I was looking at a bit of your recent activity. You went to Ukraine just last week to cover the restart of the Ukrainian Premier League. What was that experience like?
Very humbling, very sobering. I mean, just the simple things like you've got to fly to Krakow, get a car to the border, and you walk across the border, past all these effectively refugee camps, UNHCR, just tragic stories, just sitting there waiting for hope. I mean, apparently it's improved a lot. The Poles have been absolutely brilliant. And when you get to the Ukrainian side, when you get through sort of customs there, immigration there's a huge sign with a Polish flag from the Ukrainians saying, "Thank you, you were the first ones to come to our aid." They quite like Brits over there. I mean, no one likes Boris Johnson for many reasons over here, but if you go to Ukraine, they like him because of the, effectively the military support and the financial support that the UK have given them. And then I had to get a car with a security guy with sort of press on the front of it, all the stuff you see on TV, to Kyiv. And we had to gun it a bit because there's an 11 o'clock curfew, even though we had press on it. But, you get stopped a lot. There are all these checkpoints, guns out and all that. So it was I've done a few fairly lively areas before, but this was air raid sirens. This was, you go into a cafe just to get a coffee. I mean, normal life is going on in Kyiv, which was definitely a message they wanted to get that out, whether that's two fingers to Moscow, whether that was a message to the West, we're alive and kicking, keep supporting us. But you will go into, I've been going there for 20 odd years to Kyiv for matches. And there's certain places you go to near the Olympic Stadium, which and you go in there, normally you would ask, or they would show you where the loo is. Now they show you where the bomb shelter is, just in case the air raid sirens go off. So very humbling, talking to the players, but particularly the coaches. How do you prepare for a game when, in some cases, they're looking for training facilities which haven't been bombed. Some of their players have been protecting their villages. Anyone under the age of 59 can't cross a border because they have to stay and fight, all men under the age of 59. So that, the players are remarkably resilient. I have to say it wasn't the greatest football match I've ever seen, but, they're bound to be rusty. They haven't played for ages. They haven't really properly been able to train. So, but a very passionate occasion in terms of singing the anthem. President Zelensky gave a video address and all the players turned as one, a line of 22 of them, and looked up at the screen. It was very, very powerful. And I mean, Shakhtar Donetsk, who have to play their games there, because obviously the Russians have occupied their beautiful old stadium, new stadium, and they Shakhtar were quite keen to see it. Only like a couple of Western journalists or like non-Ukrainian journalists there, and they handed me my accreditation, and I looked at the accreditation. It's accreditation for the whole season, and I thought, I think maybe one trip is enough, but certainly eye-opening, very moving, and a reminder of the defiance and the power of the Ukrainian people.
Certainly so, yes. Now, of course, moving on to Newcastle United, that's obviously the club I support. You were at two of the recent games. You were there last night, I believe, but we'll go first to the Man City game from a couple of weeks ago. Does that show real intent from Newcastle United, that 3-3 draw, and where this club is moving and the way they went toe to toe with what is probably one of the best teams in Europe, if not the world?
I think that's Eddie Howe's philosophy. I think it's certainly Newcastle United fans' philosophy, and Eddie's not stupid. He realised what the fans want is players who give absolutely everything for the shirt and who are not cowed. You know, that's a Newcastle. I always get the impression, and speaking very much as a Londoner, as an outsider, but someone who's enjoyed going to Newcastle for 30 odd years, who's been on that strange boat you had on the Tyne with the revolving dance floor on the slope. The Tuxedo Princess or something. I mean, you know, it's a brilliant place. But I've often got the impression going to Newcastle that people there want to send a message out, about their pride in the area, and that involves putting that shirt on. And whether it's the 5-0 against Manchester United when Philippe Albert is attacking and chipping Schmeichel, or whether it's the way Anna Saint-Maximin was running at Manchester City, I think you'd know better than I would, but Newcastle fans want pride in the shirt, but also they want a bit of fearlessness. You know, you guys, you live life to the full. You go out and you party, you work hard, and you kind of want that from your team as well. You want them to be given absolutely everything and being on the front foot. And I think Eddie Howe knows that. You know, Steve Bruce is not a bad manager, whatever a lot of Newcastle people will say. You don't manage that number of games unless you're a decent manager. But he was just too cautious for the Newcastle psyche. And I think Eddie understands that. And that's why he is attacking. And some of his, well, probably his best signing so far has been, I think, probably Targett and Nick Pope. But, look, you know, I saw Isak last night. It was fantastic, just running. So, look, he's going to be a huge star there. But, you know, your main heroes down the years, you know, being a Jackie Milburn, a Gallagher, a Shearer, a Ferdinand, players like that, Ginola, attackers, entertainers. But I think Eddie's probably getting the balance right. You know, he's definitely tightened up the defence and more creativity in midfield with the occasional. I was really pleased to see Elliot Anderson come on for a couple of games. I think he's a huge prospect. So I think he's got the balance right there. He hasn't completely thrown money at it. If you look at all the buys, you can see the logic there, this evolution which the new owners want, and Eddie certainly wants.
Yeah, now obviously you mentioned Isak, you mentioned last night as well. There was a lot of contentious debates as to, you know, perhaps the ending of that game. Of course, Isak's second goal, whether it was offside. I mean, I'll come to that first. It was very marginal. And when you look at the replays, you know, from perhaps my point of view, I think, well, his foot's behind. Yes, perhaps his knee's ahead, but is that too tight to call as an offside? And then,
well, I mean, that's the one thing that VAR actually can get right. Is that because it's not subjective and you can't have very marginal. It's either offside or not. It's pretty cut and dried. I mean, you can have a broader argument about should only your foot be considered for the sort of the offside element, but then you can score with your shoulder. You know, you can score with your knee and thigh, hip, whatever. So I didn't have a problem with that. I don't think I even mentioned it in my match report because I just thought, well, that was offside. You know, you move on.
And then, of course, you know, there was the way the game ended in terms of Liverpool scoring in the 98th minute, despite only 5 minutes of stoppage time being added on. Yes, there was some cramp for Newcastle players. Nick Pope was down for about a minute and a half or so. What do you make of that whole situation? Obviously, from a Liverpool point of view, you know, complete elation, complete ecstasy, winning in the very last kick of the game. But should Newcastle feel aggrieved and hard done by?
No, I thought it was strong refereeing by Andre Mariner and by the fourth official, David Coote, and the VAR. I thought they got it right. I mean, it was about sort of 10, 12 minutes in. It was quite clear what Newcastle were doing in terms of the thing about Liverpool when you play them, and I've seen other teams do it to them with not necessarily as strong as a referee clamping down what the opposition do. Liverpool are all about energy, momentum, adrenaline, getting the ball, running, intensity. And it's how you disrupt that. So one of the ways you can disrupt that is just by delaying. And it happens. Where was I the night before? Oh, I was at Everton Leeds the night before, and Everton were doing it, and a weaker referee didn't call them up as much on it. So yeah, I mean, Pope's a pretty honest. I know Pope. He's a pretty honest character, but there did seem to be an element of, I mean, you know, Lascelles went down and stayed down. He looked at one point if he was not going to continue. This was 10, 15 minutes into the game when he was sort of hammering the ground. So I think not simply because Liverpool fans were making a fuss about it, were getting frustrating about it, but it was pretty obvious. I mean, in the press box, we were all pretty neutral there. And I think most people were saying, you can see what Newcastle are doing. So when it then came to, the 5 minutes were added on, I thought 5 minutes was about right. But then, of course, it's a minimum of 5 minutes, and that has to be taken into account if there is time wasting going on. I think there were 3 incidents of time wasting, because I was looking out for it from 15 minutes. In fact, I don't really keep a notepad because you're writing too quickly, but I did actually keep a note of, so-and-so stay down, so-and-so stay down. And there was one point they almost did it alphabetically, the players who were going down. So look, sympathy for Newcastle, because it would have been a fantastic result. You've had some terrible results. Or you got sort of 5 points out of your last or possible 78 or whatever, 6 points out of 81. Nice. It's pretty horrendous. But I think what this showed is that you can go toe to toe with top teams. And I think, you were missing Grimage, Sam Maximan, and one other.
Wilson and Shelby.
Wilson. Yeah, there you go. So, okay, Liverpool were missing some as well, but I thought that was I thought Liverpool deserved to win, particularly in the second half. But a draw wouldn't have flattered you.
And finally, just to sum things up, obviously, as we mentioned, Newcastle there, with this new regime and with the way Eddie Howe's management style is, with the sort of attacking intent and sort of basing that on the history of Newcastle, how far can he go with Newcastle, and how far can the club go in this new regime?
You see, Eddie Howe's a really good manager. I mean, I when I was sort of up and I saw you the other day talking to some of the Newcastle fans, and one or two of them were suggesting, well, he's like an interim and you'll get a bigger manager, like an elite name manager. Eddie Howe is a fantastic manager. He's got a point to prove. You can see his passion, you can see his intelligence, you can see the way he's developing the players. I'm sure he's heavily involved in recruitment, and you're recruiting well. I think he's perfect. I hope he's there for sort of 2-3 years, because it means you'll be doing well. It's about gradual steps. I would be amazed if you don't finish in Europe this season.
That's a positive note on which to end. Thank you, Henry. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, pleasure.
We'll end the recording there.
My pleasure.